Thank you very much. Our next speaker is our wonderful organizer, Deena Aranoff. She's the faculty director of the Richard S. Dinner Center for Jewish Studies here at GTU, and she teaches rabbinic literature, medieval patterns of Jewish thought, and the broader question of continuity and change in Jewish history. Her recent publications engage with the subjects of childcare, maternity, and the making of Jewish culture. And Deena will speak on Jewish ritual and life formation.
Thank you so much. The torrent of tragic and violent events of recent days has got me thinking about what it might mean to bend the arc towards life. Given the scale of my everyday activities, I tend to think about this on the scale of everyday life. And where are the life-affirming possibilities that could pattern even my daily course of activity? As some of you know, I have spent the most recent phase of my intellectual life considering the role of the household and family relations in the making of Jewish culture. This was good pairing. At the heart of my effort is my desire to revise the common shorthand that prevails in the narration of Jewish history, namely the use of the twin settings of the temple and the synagogue as symbols of all major Jewish developments over time. These settings, along with their personification in priest and rabbi, have provided a metonymic mapping of the Jewish landscape. These are the major sites of Jewish culture and activity, and they tend to dominate discussions of Jewish spatiality. They also suggest a temporal schema of sorts, as they signify the basic timeline of ancient temple times and the rabbinic alternative. I will say they also correspond to the bibliographic shorthand that often can organize Jewish history, namely Torah and Talmud. I propose that we add a third node to this shorthand, the household, as well as its personified metonym, the mother. To add the household to these spatial distillations of Jewish culture to form a kind of trifold, so to speak, addresses a mystery that has long resided at the heart of Jewish history, namely, what accounts for the persistence of Jewish cultural forms in conditions of diaspora, rupture, and migration? The tendency to distinguish between the household and religious life leaves scholars without a means by which to account for the vitality of Jewish culture in periods of evident change and disruption, especially to the larger institutional elements such as temple and synagogue. I'm aware of the fact that in this room are amazing social historians who do not do this. It's more of a kind of shorthand I see in the general landscape that I'm trying to penetrate and kind of add this third piece, which I found the term household to be that useful intervention. Franz Rosenzweig considered the household to be a significant third platform in the making of Jewish culture. As he put it, the synagogue, the academy, and the home, those are his terms, form a tripod of sites central to Jewish life. My aim is to elaborate further on this third platform, the household, and to center it in narratives of the making of Jewish culture over time. And it's my hope that this will provide a thicker account of Jewish cultural activity. It's kind of fun to think of it in terms of Sam's diaspora and mysticism. And a centering of the household will also provide a key to the vitality of Jewish culture over time. As the Solomonic verse bids us consider, a trifold cord is not easily broken. Now, household-based Jewish cultural enactments, how to do it, do not persist unchanged. Consider, for example, the many languages to have emerged in the centuries and contexts of the Jewish diaspora. It is not my contention that a set of static cultural constants are mechanically reproduced in the household. Quite the contrary, actually. the household serves as a context within which these forms are performed and altered, always in relation to circumstance and tradition. These elements are generated and transformed in the household, the street, the kitchen, and the many vernacular modalities of Jewish life. They are not fixed constants, but a constantly adjusting set of behaviors, much in the way that minhag, custom, is both a wellspring of inherited Jewish cultural forms as well as a means of their adjustment to historical circumstance. In other words, it is both a conduit of transmission and alteration of inherited Jewish teachings. So too the household is animated by a similar ambivalence. It serves as the matrix both of the transmission and alteration of Jewish culture over time. A short remark on the term household is in order here. I tend to use the term household to refer to this primary environment within which humans operate, a critical site in the social, economic, and cultural formations of life. I avoid the term home with its sentimental allure. The word home tends to conjure up the image of a post-industrial nuclear family in a state of private leisure. Wendell Berry commented, "It's the place where the residers do not do the work." This term has undergone extensive feminist and sociological critique, as it often conceals the labors of household life, as well as the variations and constraints of households that operate under the conditions of migration, oppression, and economic distress. A critique of this term home has been put forward by many feminists, especially African-American feminists, for whom this phantasm of the home, as it circulates in scholarly and popular discourse, is so far removed from the labors and enactments of everyday experience. In her writings, Bell Hooks coined the term home place to summon a larger, more vital image of the household as a site for resistance and refuge in the devastating conditions of enslavement and racial oppression. Hooks's home place refers to the essential household and largely to the labors of women in the making of wellness for communities that were struggling in devastating circumstances. Home place is the site for cultural resistance and for the formation of life-affirming relationships. As Hooks describes it, and I'll quote here, "In our young minds, houses belong to women, were their special domain, not as property, but as places where all that truly mattered in life took place. The warmth and comfort of shelter, the feeling of our bodies, the nurturing of our souls. There we learned dignity, integrity of being. There we learned to have faith. The folks who made this life possible, who were our primary guides and teachers, were Black women," end quote. For Hooks, home place signals the activity of Black women who work to preserve life. She retrieves this critical role in the African-American experience, and in so doing provided me with a paradigm for my own efforts to uncover the mechanisms of cultural production and life affirmation that takes place in the Jewish household. I therefore use the term household to refer to the network of persons engaged in the collaborative work of sustaining life. The household is the site for the activity of child rearing, food cultivation, processing, and consumption. Wendell Berry has some snark comments about the modern home is the place for consuming things and putting them away. Yes. My use of the term household corresponds to the Greek oikos with its capacious range signifying the full network of economic and social relations that have to coordinate in efforts towards productivity and life. The household, therefore, does not refer to a cloistered private space, but to a web of relations that operate in a cluster that could be called public. The household in this sense does not stand apart from religious and cultural formations, but right at the center of it, not as a private place, but one integrated into the full landscape of human activity, to refer back to Hooks, the place where all that truly mattered in life took place. In recent days, I've been thinking more about this more applied aspect of my project, that is, What is the role of household culture for the well-being of each of us and in the pursuit of life more generally? What can we say about the cultural patterns that govern our activities and perspectives? And if those patterns are generated in the household, and primarily in the first months and years of life, how might we pay greater attention to the formations there? And in the study of religion, so much attention is paid to ceremony outside the household, to education when the child pivots from the family context to paid context. What would happen if we instead centered the household in our study of these formations? Furthermore, we're living in a time in which we are experiencing, I'm guessing each of us, a severe deterioration and thinning out of our household culture. And I won't say more on that, but my question is, can we rehabilitate the household? Can we restore to it the thickness of culture that is beneficial for life, for the development of children? For now, and for this talk, I'm simply identifying the central role of the household in Jewish cultural history, which I should say is not a difficult procedure, because even a cursory review of Jewish practices would reveal the household as a primary site of ritual performance, recitation, and transmission. I have here, the architect of Jewish materiality is sitting here with us, Daniel Boyarin, but he had to excuse himself. But I think of him as the one who identified most clearly the role of materiality, the body, and physical enactments in Jewishness. The notion of the household as a matrix within which Jewish culture unfolds is beautifully captured in a rabbinic analogy that I'd like to share with you, a midrash that Elizabeth Shanks Alexander includes in her essay on orality and rabbinic writing, and a midrash that also came to life beautifully in a seminar that I taught here at the GTU, and I remember reading it with Amy Tobin's comments as we went along, in which the rabbis are exploring the difference between oral and written Torah. And they do it through a parable, and I'll share this with you. To what may the matter be compared? That is, oral and written Torah. To a king of flesh and blood who had 2 servants. He loved them both with a perfect love. To one he gave a cob of wheat and a bundle of flax, and to the other he gave a cob of wheat and a bundle of flax. What did the wise one do? He took the flax and wove it into a tablecloth. He took the wheat and made it into fine flour. He sifted it and he ground it. He kneaded it and he baked it. Is anyone hearing in the night kitchen? Till it looked okay. No. Then he placed it on top of the table and spread over it the tablecloth. Then he left it for the king's return. The foolish among them did not do anything at all. After some days, the king returned to his house and said, "My sons, bring me what I gave you." One brought out the bread of fine flour upon the table with the tablecloth spread over it. The other brought out the wheat in a box and the bundle of flax upon it. Alas for his shame, alas for his disgrace. That's the quote. This passage tells us the story of 2 servants and how they handled the gift of raw wheat and flax, here serving as an analogy for the Torah itself. One is praised for the creative and industrious work that he took up, notably the domestic tasks of weaving and milling and baking and serving. This servant did not passively preserve the teachings of the Torah, but sustained and altered them in pleasing and useful ways. Note the detail with which the household tasks are enumerated. Household work here serves as metaphor for the work of making Torah. In contrast, the second servant is criticized for having failed to rework and reshape the gifts. This parable instructs the listener towards the positive role of human activity in the unfolding of revelation. But as David Stern has pointed out, a rabbinic parable rarely serves as a simple one-on-one illustration of a complex matter. It often introduces a new element and provokes a subtle complication of the subject at hand. In this case, the analogy to the household is anything but a simple device. It summons the fullness of household operations as the matrix from which the oral Torah spools forward. It also suggests that God is the one who will be seated and will dine upon these prepared foods. I haven't thought about yet the implications of that, theologically speaking. Thus, the life-sustaining and ceaseless work of life that takes place in the household is also the process by which the Torah unfolds in such intimate relation to the human condition. This midrash portrays revelation as a household matter. In my emphasis upon the household as a matrix of Jewish life, I have, in a way, returned to a conversation in my mind exclusively with my teacher, Yosef Yerushalmi, may his memory be a blessing. For in his book Zachor, he was adamant that the formation of collective Jewish memory is not predicated on some vaguely genetic endowment, back to your learning, Ari, nor to an, quote, innate psychic structure, end quote, nor that a Jewish infant would, quote, speak Hebrew spontaneously or remember suddenly that Abraham journeyed from Ur to Canaan, end quote. Instead, Yerushalmi states that, quote, only the group can bequeath both language and a transpersonal memory, end quote. It is only a shame that although Yerushalmi identifies the fact that individual memory is forged through social frameworks, he does not avail himself of these frameworks to resolve the mystery at hand, that is, the persistence and transmission of collective Jewish memory over time. He laments, he says, quote, for so bookish a people, end quote, he can't then make use of what others might have done, which is to turn to folklore and storytelling and other kind of sociological elements. He states, how can we account for the making of these more widespread collective cultural postures? But of course, I would say that even for so bookish a people, among whom the guiding elites do play an undoubtedly significant role, it is precisely the matrix of the household and its oral and linguistic elements to which we might turn to our inquiry into what bequeaths Jewish language, memory, and sensibility. And it is to these elements that I turn in my efforts to retrieve the process of Jewish cultural production and to examine the ways in which various Jewish sensibilities and cultural expressions have carried forward in time, carried through song, language, storytelling, the everyday life of the household, the street, and the neighborhood. In many ways, therefore, my goal is to make visible the daily activities that sustain life in the household. Household life does not take place in the abstract, but with utter specificity. And it is not just the household, but the synagogue that serves as a cultural matrix, for the synagogue too is in need of a revision. The synagogue often serves as the poetic other to the household. It provides the other half of the public-private, male-female dichotomy that organizes understandings of Jewish spatiality. As a note, it also supplies the temporal other when paired with the temple. But I'm not going to get into that. The synagogue, especially in its earliest iterations, functioned in ways quite akin to household spaces, often continuous in architectural as well as functional elements to those of a household. To borrow from Sam Heilman's contemporary sociological characterization of the synagogue, he uses this term sociability as the major function of a synagogue. He says, the synagogue is a, quote, house of assembly where the actors become associates, end quote. To be sure, Heilman was describing the sociology of a 20th century American synagogue. However, even the earliest remains of ancient synagogues suggest the primary role of assembly and association in these spaces. Early synagogues have notable similarities in their design and decoration with those of the domestic spaces of wealthier Jewish households. As Joseph Gutman noted a half-century ago, it is often difficult to identify early synagogue buildings in antiquity since, quote, they are probably indistinguishable from domestic architecture. Indeed, early synagogues might best be described as extensions of the household, spaces where people might gather, study, eat, lodge, and discuss matters of common interest. Lee Levine so thoroughly identified the synagogue with these general communal functions that he proposed that we might look to the city gates of ancient Israelite settlements as the progenitor to the synagogue. The ample shelter and seating that usually accompanied ancient city gate structures may have provided the physical context for the range of behaviors later associated with the synagogue. Thus, although there is a tendency to refer to the synagogue as shorthand for elite male Jewish institutions and as a point of contrast with the household, I would argue that it is not, in fact, an institution that stands apart from Jewish households, but is, in many ways, a part of them. The ancient synagogue functioned as a collective space, continuous in many of its elements and sociological functions to that of an extended set of households. To use the term Charlotte von Robert has introduced in studies of Jewish spatiality, the synagogue was part of the neighborhood. Thus, much as I have critiqued the notion of household as a private space that cloisters women and quotidian activities, the synagogue as a public space that hosts exclusively male ceremonial activities is ripe for a similar revision. In my last moment here, I would like to share a text, which I've noticed is a little bit of a pattern today. A rabbinic text may be familiar to some of you, in which I think the household as an analytical framework provides a framework for understanding the synagogue and Jewish ritual more generally. And that, it's coming up, actually, Passover is coming up. This is from Tractate Psachim, and there's a debate in Tractate Psachim about whether or not it is permissible to sanctify the wine of the Sabbath, to say Kiddush, in the synagogue. And you might say, why is that a debate? Wouldn't it be the ultimate fulfillment of such a ceremony to do it in the ultimate of Jewish spaces? But however, the synagogue is not necessarily appropriate because sanctification of the wine on Friday night is so linked to the meal and the household environment. So much so that the debate ensues, if someone has said Kiddush in the synagogue, have they fulfilled their obligation? Rav says, well, not the obligation to drink wine, that's certain, but for the recitation of those verses that sanctify the day, sure. Shmuel, his common interlocutor, says, actually, even for the recitation, that is the Kiddush, they have not fulfilled their obligation. Well, then, why do we make Kiddush in the synagogue? Well, and to be fair, this answer is supplied in part to help shore up one of the positions, but because there are guests that eat, sleep, and hang out in the synagogue, so given that the synagogue can claim household status, it can be the site for the recitation of Kiddush. Ein Kiddush ela bimkom seuda. There is no fulfillment of that ritual if it's not in the place of partaking of a meal. To conclude, I just will come back to the theme of the day, and my sense that one of the most profound demands of our time is the absolute necessity of drawing our attention to those matters that have long resided in the background of our religious and cultural imaginations, and to bring those matters into the foreground of our understandings of religion, of culture, nature, and humanity. And I think this move to bring the constant matters of life from the background to the foreground, everyday life, our basic needs for fresh air, fertile soil, sociability, these things that maybe at one point we had the luxury of having them in the background, and pay more attention to irregularities and disruptions, to pay more attention to that which is absent over that which is present, to assume that that which is present will continue to provide in a regular and unceasing way. We might have been able to afford those representations. However, we can no longer afford to do so. I feel that we have found ourselves in a state of collective cultural derangement, living out patterns of social life that damage the resources upon which we depend for life. To some extent, this derangement could be traced to cultural representations millennia in the making, in which there is diminished attention paid to the constant matters upon which we rely for life. So this is a small contribution, that is, to introduce the household and everyday life into the making of Jewish culture, but I wonder whether if we restore the visibility and the centrality of the basic provisions upon which we depend, we might also begin to pattern our actions in closer relation to life. Thank you.